Please welcome veteran DynamicsCon presenter David Laster. Today, this speaker will be presenting on A Year in the Life of a GP System Administrator. Please stick around after David's session for a live Q&A.
All right. Hello. Thank you for joining my session today. My name is David Laster. I have a session for us today at DynamicsCon 2023 on a year in the life of a GP system administrator. If you're new to GP, or if you are exposed to GP, or if you're using GP and want to know more about what it takes to maintain your Dynamics Great Plains environment, you're in the right place. And I really hope the next 30 to 40 minutes is really educational, informative, and can help you do a better job at your office. Partners as well, I hope if you're watching, you have a fair amount to learn as well, because Dynamics GP isn't going anywhere, superheroes. Now, my name is David Laster, and I want to first of all thank DynamicsCon for putting together this year's session. They have gotten more interesting year after year, and I've been blessed to be able to do more than one presentation. But my background is Dynamics Great Plains initially. I've been doing it for more than half of my life. Business Central I've been playing with since 2018 and recently attained my functional consultant certificate. I've also been using Power BI for a number of years and to developed a number of solutions for Great Plains and for Business Central, and commonly present at organizations to help educate end users on best practices and good ways to use all of these products in your own environment. My company is Greybock. We're north of the Boston area. We're a family-run company. We've been in business about 28 years and serve the entire Dynamics line and do custom development to support integrations and all of the Microsoft products. What we're here for today is to learn about the 11 most common Dynamics Great Plains system administrator tasks. I came up with this list putting together a boot camp for new users of Dynamics Great Plains. All too often, I hear people come to me say, I'm new to Great Plains. I'm the system administrator. I need your help. Well, I found myself always helping and coaching on the same things over and over again. And this is what I boiled that list down to look like. It starts with break-fix support, of course. You're going to have that. You're going to be aware of backups and restores and points in time, users and administration, installing new workstations, documentation, how to call for help. It's a lot to maintain. The bigger the environment, the more complex it can be, as well as the more risky one of your actions might be to maintain that system. So let's learn. First of all, if you don't have an administrator log, that's the first place to start. I am a big fan of OneNote. OneNote is an amazing place to store all of your system administration data. It stores screenshots from capturing of error messages that people send you in an email. You can write and type up correspondence and capture email documentation from issues that you resolved in the past. It's a library for other people after you to refer to in the case that they need to look up a problem that happened again. Changes to your system are auditable events now, and all too often I'm helping folks, my customers, deal with an IT systems audit. Changes in user administration or roles and things like that are now more under the purview. So having a log to document that stuff is definitely a first stop shop if you're going to be a good GP system administrator. Power BI is where it comes in next. It's like the next level of this. I've written a number of Power BI reports for Dynamics GP administration. A couple of them are free and available for download on our website, but that's not what we're here for. I just want you to know that Power BI can help your system administration by exposing all kinds of information that you're going to want to know about to maintain your uptime. The number one issue people have to deal with is dealing with break-fix support and troubleshooting issues that arise absolutely from nowhere. This happens to the best of us, and it happens in the best of environments. It's not your fault, but what do you do when it happens, right? Oh my gosh, it's broken. Now what are we going to do? Well, this happens. It's not your fault. Error messages will pop up to end users in Great Plains. GP stopped. What does this cryptic error message mean? I have no idea. But a systems administrator needs to be familiar with what to do when they happen. Well, first things first, be calm. Triage the situation like you were in a car wreck. It takes a minute to get your bearings, but if you ask the right questions and gather the intelligence, you're going to end up being in a pretty good spot. But triage the situation, find out how severe it is, right? Find out what happened, talk to the person that reported the error message, and have them document screenshots of the problem that occurred. Check the process monitor on their workstation. It's available when GP is running. You can go to the Dynamics GP button at the top and then open Process Monitor. And if something is still going on in the background, that tool is fantastic for telling you maybe what might be holding up a process or triggering one of these error messages. Determine how severe it is, right? Does this affect just one user on one workstation? Or is it possible that this might have spread to the database or might be part of a network problem? Think about what to do before you do anything. Is it a transaction? Is it a login? Is it a printing event? Use your brain to think about how severe the problem is, because it really will dictate a very different course of action. Check your backups, right? If you're getting curious and it might be a data problem, make sure that you have backups available just in case they're needed. And I always recommend and set up hourly logging as well. That helps us get easily to a point in time restore. I've had a number of customers, especially payroll customers, will call sometimes and say, oh, it crashed. And the best thing to do is to say, do you have a backup? And if you have an hourly log, get everybody out. We'll restore to that point in time. And it's oftentimes a heck of a lot cheaper and easier than cleaning up corrupt data. And if you don't have a backup after a message, grab one. You're going to want to hold on to it just in case, or you might even need to restore that over a test database or put it into a development environment to do more extensive troubleshooting. Google's everybody's friend, whether you like it or not. Google is amazing at providing answers. There's a lot of forums and boards out there, including Dynamics User Group, that surface when you're searching for answers to problems. And if worst comes to worst, you own a Microsoft product and you're subscribed to it through annual enhancements, so you might as well utilize their teams as well. They're fantastic. Now, when you're maintaining Dynamics GP, and an error occurs, who's in, right? Who could be affected? Dynamics has given us a number of windows that help system administrators kind of navigate and do things. One of them is see who's in. It's the user activity window. Another one of my favorites is the send message button. It's in the later versions of Dynamics GP. And you can type a message up in here, and after a short couple of moments, anybody who's logged into Great Plains will get a message that pops up that you can tell them, hey, get out. I don't want to do more damage. Give me a minute while I solve a problem. So this has been very helpful for multi-company environments where we need to keep everything else up, but we need to take one company down. We do have the ability within GP under certain instances to be able to create a backup from within GP. There's some documentation about that available online, but it's pretty handy if you don't have access to the actual database management tools. Number 2, database backups and restores, right? Well, if something did go wrong, what do? Right? You have to continue troubleshooting. So taking a backup is the first step, or finding a prior backup is one, but restoring it inside of SQL Management Studio is kind of the next piece. So let's take a quick tour around SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server itself is like the backbone of Dynamics GP. It's where all the data lives, okay? There's a couple of different Dynamics databases involved that are out there. One of them is the central command center. It's called the system database by the name of Dynamics, right? In a single tenant environment, it's generally always called Dynamics. And you have one or more companies that are part of that environment, right? Each of those databases will live and grow over time. And ultimately, you will need to maintain enough disk space for the database itself. And if you have other drives or if you're creating nightly backups on that SQL server, that they're not chewing up too much space, that you have enough room overhead. Maybe you put an alert on that server that tells you, hey, I only have about 15 or 20% left of disk space. Check me out. Use some of the functions and features inside of SQL Server like maintenance plans. I got a few screenshots here to show you what this looks like. So the SQL Server Management Console itself gives you this list of databases. The Dynamics database, again, is a control database, but most of the other ones are company databases. One of the other items that we'll talk about today is creating a new company. When you create a new company, we'll have a moment on that, but it puts a new database out here. It lives in the same SQL instance. And then Dynamics is like the glue that holds it all together. It's aware of the user security. It's aware of some modified reports and forms and a number of things that live in each company. The report server is it's a SQL Server reporting server database. And I mention that because Great Plains has some awesome SQL reports that you can just run through a wizard to deploy And they live in this database, that report server database there when they're deployed, part of this SQL instance. I also have a Smart Connect database there because maybe some ISVs that you have their own database. So as part of the SQL Server ecosystem, you might also have non-GP specific databases. Now, SQL reporting services on the top right here is like a website. And when you deploy the reports, each company has its own report, so you can get an age trial balance or an inventory status report. So there's a number of good things out there to leverage. When you're looking at the properties of a specific database, noting where it lives on your SQL server is pretty important, because when people install SQL, there's some default path names that you set up. You want to get them right. If you have a data drive and a log drive and an operating system drive and a backup drive, and they're all separate, that's good. That helps you kind of compartmentalize and bring some efficiency and optimization to the way that SQL Server is going to perform. But the path names are really important. In this instance here, they're all going to the C drive. You generally want to be pretty careful about that. Data doesn't generally belong on a C drive. It belongs elsewhere. We'll be back to this thought in a little bit when we talk about creating a new company. The folder structure for SQL is pretty common no matter what drive you choose as the default. You'll see this folder structure. It generally makes sense if you haven't been there. It's pretty easy to understand. You can always keep an eye on disk space so that you don't get in a position where there's not enough to create tonight's backup, or your users really can't use the application. You'll get some strange messages and create an undue support case for yourself. When you're on the SQL Server, oftentimes you have integrating products. eConnect is the SQL service, or is a service for Great Plains that allows integrations to bring data in and pull it out of DynamicsGP. That runs as a domain service. So if the password changes on the services account or it expires and you're affected by that, your integrations might also be affected. So always be aware of what those are and know what the passwords are to those services accounts, and if they have an expiration policy so that you beat those to the punch. Tools inside of Management Studio here, that last screenshot on the bottom is what a maintenance plan looks like. I generally would create my own plans. They run on their own. It's like the hamster in the wheel doing its own thing. It's creating the backup, it's doing the log, and then it's doing a once a week integrity check. But that fourth one I have on there called one-time backup, that helps me maintain. In a support case, I can go and right-click execute, and it just grabs a backup of everything, just on demand, right? So kind of a neat tool to have if you're a SQL administrator for DynamicsGP, a tip for you. Number 3, users and security administration, right? We have new people that come, we have people that no longer work with us, and we have some turnover to deal with. We also have new companies that come on board, and people need access to those. So, there's always going to be some level of security administration. It's a highly auditable area. So, be mindful when you're in the security mode, okay? DynamicsGP maintenance, user maintenance specifically, is not just creating a user and walking away. That's really not that easy with DynamicsGP for certain things. But when you create a new GP user, you have to think to yourself, well, should this person also be in management reporter user? Because that's a whole separate setup step. Just like Smart Connect, if they have an ISV product that needs to have a new user added or a user added to that product downstream, then you need to maintain those users and have the appropriate permissions in those applications to do that as a system administrator. Follow an onboarding checklist. Do the same thing all the time, every time when you're onboarding a new person so that you don't miss anything. There are some great tools here that I'll demonstrate here for you in a second here for creating new users that bring some pretty nice efficiencies, like the copy button, right? If you have a new user that already should take the position of somebody else that's already there, then you can just copy the permissions over into the new user using the copy button in the user setup process. So if you're setting up users one by one, maybe there's a more efficient way by using that function. After users are created in here, we have to think about things in terms of security. Segregation of duties is one of them. Who can create the vendor, who can enter the invoice, who can post the invoice, who can pay the invoice, who can void the invoice. So, you want to have some separation of duties where you can. I know a lot of the DynamicsGP environments have a lot of smaller user bases, 15, 20, 25 users. But there's a lot of them out there, and there's not a lot of room for segregation of duties. But think about where you can and use the security roles and tasks appropriately to do that. Test those roles and security tasks on your own user first, before you just go and give it to another user. You can create a security test user and copy Joe's security into your security to troubleshoot something. And then you can modify certain pieces and test it out to be sure that any solution you provide is actually tested, and you're not really doing the testing with the end user, causing a little bit of pain and anguish. That's never fun. All right. Reports and forms are important. If you have different reports and forms dictionaries, or if you have different reports that you want to allow for different companies, it's kind of a fine-tuning fork inside of GP. Generally, everybody uses the same modified reports and forms in all companies, but that's not a truism from an administration standpoint. So know that there are some technical ways to utilize that. And if you have questions, the community is out there. The Doug boards will certainly look for somebody to give you an answer. Security auditing is difficult. 2 more points on this is that security auditing is hard. Great Plains gives you one thing. It's this right here. It's the security reports, security task list, security role assignment. It's a lot of black and white paper that doesn't mean a whole lot, but it gives the answers, unfortunately. It's dozens or hundreds of pages, depending on your user base. And another sad thing is that there's no smart lists for Great Plains security. So in terms of maintaining security, kind of know what you're doing, keep a log, realize that there's some tools available to help you be efficient at it. If you have a complex environment and haven't figured out how to really digest what you have, Dynamics Great Plains can be available to Microsoft Power BI. I myself have had the great fortune of presenting at DynamicsCon in the past. I want to recommend, if you have time, to check out this. It's posted on the Doug YouTube page. It's a Power BI approach to understanding Great Plains security. So you can learn lessons that I've learned about using Power BI to help inform your GP security reporting, save on costs when auditors ask questions, be more certain about who has access to what, and provide segregation of duties to visually show that person A doesn't have the same access as person B. The number 4 item that you'll have to deal with as a system administrator is product updates. Not just Microsoft Dynamics GP product updates, but updates to ISV solutions or updates to your integration products, or maybe even your custom solutions, through development. So these are considerations because they don't just jam into GP. There's a thoughtful process that needs to unfold for that to happen. But let's first just briefly review where we're at in time, superheroes. In the modern life cycle, which is the term that references the bottom of this chart, right? This chart demonstrates some of the past from Dynamics, right? 2013, 15, 20. I know a lot of people are still on 2016. I'd love to see you upgrade here pretty soon. In fact, you really do need to. 2018 and R2, but now we're in this modern life cycle. It's just called Dynamics GP. Sweet and simple. What that means is that we get a service pack every year, which is great. We get a service pack and a feature update in October of every year. We have the option to actually install that update. Most of my customer base does because they're on the modern life cycle, and it's equivalent of just a service pack. Oftentimes, it's about a 2-hour downtime window, 3 hours max, to just do the service pack. And to get the new features, to get the new fields on the windows, the new reports, the new security fixes, there's emailing functions and features. Being current is an important thing to do. So here we are, right? DynamicsCon 2023 in terms of this picture here. If you're on 2018 or 18 R2, you're technically out of mainstream support. There's nothing new coming at you. So get to the modern life cycle and away you go. When performing Dynamics Great Plains updates, obviously modern life cycle is what we're, the guiding force, if you will. Depending on how far back in time you are, you might have some major version updates. Microsoft isn't releasing those. They're just doing those incrementals now, which is fantastic. But every now and then, Windows can throw an update at you, a Windows Server update. And we've had those in the past affect Dynamics Great Plains users in broad swaths. So, when you do an update, sometimes it's not even yours. It's Windows that performed an update, and it might force you into a security or a troubleshooting stance. That could happen at the server level. It could also happen at the anti-malware or at the security level inside of Windows or on the laptops, desktops. All right. ISV compatibility is important when you're going to deploy, let's say, a new product. Great Plains is installed and up and running, and you want to add in a new product to it. Okay. Pick your product, right? And when you go to install that, it's important that you get the right version of the code to do that that's compatible with what you have. not every version of every ISV works with your version of Great Plains. Trust me. You can cause some damage. You can essentially cause yourself some headache. So get the documentation and confirm compatibility before you actually install software to your GP ecosystem. Okay. Dynamics Great Plains has a version when you launch it, so you can always tell when you launch GP and get through the login window what version you're on. Windows on the right side here, remember from a couple of years back where suddenly Windows started printing all these black boxes where we had our logos on our sales invoices and purchase orders. And this is an example where a Windows security update happened, and the community rallied to try to put together a way through that. It was challenging, but you got to be ready. I have a list for you superheroes at the bottom of this, a whole bunch of really current links on updating Dynamics Great Plains, the latest version, upgrading payroll, updating information about the current life cycle. And at the bottom, I had in the past, in fall of 2021, done a presentation also for DynamicsCon here on how to stack the deck for success on your next Dynamics GP upgrade. So if you're interested in this feature of the year in the life, there's a whole lot more content available for you out on the YouTube website. Number 5, this happens a lot, especially for somebody like me who supports a lot of customers. I get the request to create a new Dynamics Great Plains company. Okay. There's a tool for doing this, right? It is called the Dynamics GP Utilities program. Okay. When that program launches, it gives you the capability to create a new company or to do some other utility tasks. And when you're done, right? It has a shell company. But when you're going in to create this new company, a couple of considerations to think about. When you create it in SQL, you're going to need a company ID. It's 5 characters, does not begin with a number, can't use characters. It has to be just letters. So, think of an acronym for your company, think of the first few letters of your company, and then also think about creating a test version of that company, right? Your live company and a test version. So you create all your setups, you can copy it into the test company and do some transaction testing to make sure your setups are good. So when you create one, you're creating 2, a live and a test. There's some elements that automatically get put out there when you do that new company if they're configured, like new Excel reports that are linked to GP, as well as SSRS reports. If you've configured reporting tools, then a new company will go ahead and give you the option to script those out as well. So you can do a full deployment pretty much with just one pass at the utility window. After the new companies are created, they're sitting out there inside of SQL. We need to make sure they get backed up, right? Creating a company and forgetting to get it backed up and then having a disaster in 3 months is not going to do you any good. So make sure as soon as it's created that it's part of the backup plan, and confirm the next day that last night's backup worked. After that company's created, a couple of bare minimum things is you got to assign the currency access so that they can conduct business in a currency, and set up the fiscal period so they have an accounting cycle against which to follow. Once those are done, you can go module by module to figure out which setups are really required. Is it financial, purchasing? Is it sales? Is it inventory? Also have a plan for the ISV products. Sometimes you're creating like a holding company and it doesn't need to have extender, okay? But if you're creating a whole new copy of another existing company that's going to do e-commerce business, then the setups and the ISV requirements are probably going to be a lot more stringent in that regard. So be careful when you're creating it to make sure that you do those setups appropriately. You may not want to provide user access to those new company until it's set up. It is an option to copy users over when you set up and create the company, but if you hold off on that, so it keeps people out of your company until you're really ready to release it to the wild. And then also think about integrations and customizations. Always do that in a test environment first. Never do that in a live environment until after you have a good solid sign off from the end users, as well as a good solid plan to migrate that to the production environment. Now I have a checklist. I've been using this checklist for a long time. It is the basis for every new company that we do. It's broken up really into like 4 sections. I will have it here. You can take a screenshot or you can download this presentation from the DynamicsCon site. We have a couple of tasks like we talked about at the system level, right, in that Dynamics database for users and currencies. Then the next step is to really, create the company. There's a number of windows in the dialog that you go through to, at the end of the day, create the database and publish the SQL and Excel reports. That's the wizard. That's what to expect if you've never done this before. And the next step is to look at the company-specific setups. Every company needs to have modules set up before they can be used. So this is the list I use. I go in order. I make notes in my spreadsheet as to which ones they need, which ones they don't, and set them up accordingly. The third piece of this here are the master records. Like once the modules are set up, then we can load the vendors or load the customers or whatever else is going to be needed to process transactions in that environment. And then the last piece is then have your customizations and modifications, get born or go into effect. Number 6, reports and forms maintenance. Reports and forms dictionaries are probably the hardest part to deal with inside of Dynamics GP. They get corrupt periodically. They become corrupt for a number of reasons. Most oftentimes, the last couple of years, upgrades have been corrupting the reports dictionaries as well as the forms dictionaries. Why? I think it's mostly because they've been adding a number of new fields and a number of new reports, and there's something just that's incongruent about the existing database. So oftentimes, we'll go through the process here of exporting them and then recreating them essentially in the newer version. But from a reports and forms modification standpoint, familiarize yourself with these terms, okay? Reports.dic and forms.dic are probably the two most important ones. Just about everybody is going to have a reports.dic. I'll take a moment on this because that is the place where all of your modified reports are for your Dynamics environment. If you modify your AP check or your sales invoice or your stock status report, you probably only want to modify it once and have it shared by everybody. So that reports.dic is going to live in a shared network resource, the D drive, or the X drive or the G drive, whatever your or you can use UNC pathing to get to the shortcut of this folder, but it's a shared resource. And that really needs to be available to every point of entry, every point that's launching Great Plains, whether it be a workstation, a laptop, a desktop, or a terminal server. It needs to have a clear line of sight to reports.dic. When they go to print the checks, security is going to tell it to go print the modified check. It's going to find it, and it's going to print the layout appropriately. It's a really important point when you're trying to print checks with the person for the first time. Make sure your dictionaries are set up the right way. Forms dictionary is for window changes. If you move a field, hide a field, add a field, change a form in any way, that lives in its own dictionary. Also something you want to put in the shared environment. Other dictionaries can exist for GP. If you're modifying reports or forms, put them in a shared spot. That's what that question mark means. The package generation process is pretty simple. Oops, I went a little bit too far there, but that's okay. We'll roll with it. The reports and forms screenshot here at the top. Notice that it's the UNC path name to where these two dictionaries live. They'll have a date and a timestamp on them, as well as a file size. Have a backup of these. Just copy paste to give yourself a file level backup in case one of them becomes corrupt. You can always rename the old one, restore the backup that you have, and hopefully that corruption will not be surviving. All right, that's at the dictionary level. When you have a modified form inside Great Plains, the second window down there shows a customer maintenance window. It's got a little dot right before the word customer maintenance. That's telling me that that's a modified window. There's also windows that have VBA modifications to them, and those have an additional dot. So there can be a dot before, a dot after, or either scenario, honestly. So depending on how the window's been changed, which tool used it, the dot would appear on either side. On the bottom right-hand corner is the customization maintenance window. It's your best friend if you're going to maintain reports and forms. It allows you to do a backup and to restore a backup. Okay, so you can do one at a time, or you can click multiple at a time, or you can just select them all and export them all to one big package. My preference is to export the reports to one package and the forms to its own package. So I have a full backup of each. I do it periodically because it doesn't hurt and it only takes a second. You never know when you're going to end up corruption, so I think it's a good idea to have a couple of these package files kicking around just in case. Number 7 item you'll need to deal with most likely is Management Reporter. Management Reporter has been around since 2010. It's got a lot of sea legs on it, and it is all over the place. So Management Reporter itself is not Great Plains. Know that you can have a Management Reporter user that's not a really, truly a Great Plains user. Management Reporter is meant to disseminate financial information to branch managers, budget managers, all that kind of thing. So that they're not knocking on the door of the accountant asking, and they actually are able to have access to the information on their own. So it's a sharing mechanism. So with that comes some responsibility. We got to maintain new users as they come on board, right? Or if users have an escalation in responsibility. There's 4 layers of security inside of Management Reporter. There's a viewer user. The viewer user can pretty much only see reports that have been generated. They're not going to render any of the reports on their own. You have administrators. This is the other end of that spectrum that create users and add companies and write reports, run reports, delete reports. And you also have a couple layers in the middle there. There's a generator user that can just run reports. And then there's a designer user as well that can write reports and run reports, but they can't add users. So there's good layers of security. Know what you're going to do when you set up a new user. And know also that when people leave your organization, to get rid of them from that list in the user setup window in Management Reporter. Now, the couple of pieces, components to Management Reporter is really 3 applications. The configuration console is only going to live on one server, and it is going to perform the connectivity to the SQL Server database every time somebody logs in or runs a report. The Report Designer is a tool that writes, runs reports. The viewer views reports. So, each of these has its own responsibility. If you are using the Data Mart, the Data Mart is a place, it's like a data warehouse and other terminology, where it's a copy of the real data. So the Management Reporter database is going to essentially grow because it's always copying data from the real company. The Management Reporter database, as well as the Data Mart, the Data Mart itself sometimes needs to just be rebuilt because it goes out of sync with the live company. There are instructions. It's not a hard process to follow. I have links at the bottom of the page that will give you step-by-step on how to rebuild your Data Mart. The other thing here is that a lot of end users will run reports over and over and over and over and over again. The Management Reporter doesn't ever go and delete those on their own. So they layer up. There's a whole bunch of reports out there. And if you've been using MR for 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 years and haven't actually deleted stuff that you've ran previously, your database is probably way, way, way too big. And there's a SQL script that's available for you to maintain that size of that Management Reporter database. It's got a couple of variables that you can use. One of them says, keep the top 10 most recent versions of a report. Generally, that's plenty. One is cut off up to a certain date. So, everything that's been run up through 2022, fine, delete it. I only need the stuff that's current in 23. All right. So there's a couple of options that you have to trim down the size of that database. And that link will help you get to all the rest of those answers. I got one more comment on this one here. One final thing is from inside Management Reporter, you have the capability to back up the report designs. So I would mention that that's not an IT responsibility. IT is never going to log into Management Reporter and go to your building blocks window and export your rows, columns, and trees. It's just not happening. So you as a system administrator, or maybe the controller or whoever maintains the reports, should have a process of periodically backing up the report designs from within Management Reporter so that you do have a good backup of those. It's fairly straightforward and easy to pull back in one at a time, just in case you need to restore something that got totally goofed up at some point by another user. Number 8, installing and configuring Great Plains. This is something I personally have been doing for decades, and I learned a lot and used a whole bunch of different versions of Windows and Dynamics Great Plains. And here are some considerations for you if you're going to do your own system administration. Make sure you have a good list and organization of the media that you're going to need to install. Make sure it's the right stuff and it's the right version. And if you have registration keys that need to be loaded, have them all ready before you sit down to install. And I'll show you, keep them all in the same place as well. Ask yourself, are you just installing GP or do you need to also install Management Reporter? Okay, any service pack levels for either or both. When you're installing, you really should be a local administrator on the workstation for that install. So make sure you have appropriate permission to do that before you start. Otherwise, Windows security could definitely give you a hard time, as well as bring some unintended downtime to your end user customer. Make sure when you're done installing the workstation itself that you configure it to point to the shared reports dictionaries, right? So they can see the modified check and the purchase order and the sales invoice with your logo on those. The dex.ini is also a configuration file that adds some real value to Great Plains by configuring some default settings as well as affecting some of the behavior. Follow up with that in a second. A lot of folks will come to me and say, yeah, I can install Great Plains. Well, maybe. You can also wreck it pretty badly by choosing the wrong products during the installation. So it might look easy to install and get to the end. You may have not necessarily done an appropriate installation. So always go back and look at an existing install to find out what products you need to choose for this install. Okay? Having your media organized cleanly and neatly on the server goes a long way. The screenshot here shows nice, neat, organized folders where we start with registration keys, and then we have media, service packs, and then ISV solutions. Generally would install in this order, top to bottom. I would never have code out here that doesn't belong, and only and always have the right version for the Dynamics ecosystem that you're supporting. If you need to have other versions of code, I would not put them in this main one. To me, it sends the wrong signal to the system administrator. When you're installing, you have to know the server you're connecting to. It's just part of the process. So if you don't know, or it's kind of a cryptic server name, make sure you've got that nearby when you're installing. You'll have to key that in. Also point to the reports and forms dictionary so that they have all access to the modified objects out there. And in the dex.ini, if you're installing on a remote desktop machine, a terminal server, you're going to probably want to add two switches. Enable server dropdown false and default last user false. This helps Great Plains open up with the login window with no user. Otherwise, it's pretty much always going to remember the last user. So on a terminal server, it means everybody has to remember their username and their password all the time and every time, which is not a bad thing. At the bottom of this is Leslie Vale's complete list of DEX INI switches. Feel free to check that out. There's some really good stuff in there. Number 9, ISV installations. Most environments have, I think, 3 to 5 or more ISV solutions kind of commingled inside their Dynamics Great Plains environments. Well, ISV solutions come in a lot of flavors, just like ice cream. So the first thing I ask when I try to do a GP system audit is to try to find out what type of customization is it. All right? Is it an ISV dexterity-based solution? Dynamics GP is written in dexterity. So I want to know if I'm expecting a chunk file, right, and a DIC file to be part of the reference in the configuration for the dynamics.set. Is it a non-dexterity product, right? Is it a GP add-in, right, that uses more .NET technology, and it's not going to live in a set file, okay? When we're doing add-ons, do you have infrastructure to support it? Like, are you going to do a heavy integration and then not have an appropriate SQL server to support that, disk space-wise or even bandwidth-wise? You want to consider your infrastructure before adding anything into the environment. It could destabilize it in an unforeseen way. Make sure that you've got the registration keys and the media nearby and handy. Take backups, obviously, of GP, the database, the code folder, and so forth. Know that every installation wizard for ISVs behaves a little differently. Some of them will tell you to just copy and paste the chunk file, right? That's why in the bottom left corner here, it says instructions. Everybody should give you instructions, and you should put those in your version control folder with the media always. Even when you get new versions, get new instructions and read them, because it might force you to do some upgrade steps that you might not have expected. But when you're going through the installation wizard and SmartList and Builder and some of the E1 products are notorious, they don't find the installation folder for GP. So if you just click next, 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 you might install the software in the wrong spot. So be careful about your installation path name when you're adding products to Dynamics GP. All right. Get a copy of your installation folder right before you do an install. And you can see on the local disk C here, I just copied the GP 2018 and pasted. So I have a folder level, file level backup before starting to affect change inside of that folder. If something doesn't go well, I can always revert the contents of that folder back, and then, no harm, no foul. SQL backups obviously are important before you begin. And looks like we're on to number 10. Integration services and applications. A lot of us have integrations to and from Dynamics GP. Some of them push a button. Some of it happens while we sleep. But the whole point of Dynamics Great Plains and integrating to it is to know what's going on and how it's getting done, who's responsible and when. So we talked about that audit document and that audit log, your system administrator log a little while ago, right? OneNote, it's a good place to put that information. To describe the integration, the method that it is importing, is it using eConnect? Is it using a direct table import? Is it just using Smart Connect? Is it using Integration Manager? You probably in your OneNote file want to have a catalog of all your integrations, as well as the source files. Are they text files? Are they database connections? Are they cloud server API connections? Probably want to have a register of what those are. And if any of those data sources require any kind of special username or password, log those too. Make sure you grab that information. In terms of destinations, right, the other end of the source, right, the destination side, where are you going with the data? Are you creating sales invoices with inventory items and quantities and prices, or are you just loading a chart of accounts? Okay, very different destinations and have very different levels of risk when you're building or when you're outsourcing or when you're buying an integration. Know how that's going to work and document all that information. Permissions for integrations are always a tricky thing as well. A lot of GP is really happening at the SQL level. So SQL level permissions are one thing. Application level permissions are another. McCorma, right? McCorma Microcheck's a good example. They have a number of different roles and tasks that allow a user, if assigned, the appropriate access to Windows reports and the capability of printing their style of checks. So, just installing isn't enough. Having the instructions and also making sure that the configurations and permissions of those integrations make it across the goal line before you really work with end users in a way that's going to be meaningful for them. Also, leverage your test company with your integrations to and from GP first. Make sure it works there before you unleash an integration into your production environment. So our last and final sysadmin task of the year is probably going to be an ongoing task, actually, and that's your process documentation and training guides. So process documentation, again, I said this is how to do things in GP. It helps you, it helps end users. It also is something that you want to create for an administrator, not just end users. How to create a new user, how to modify a report, how to export or import your reports and forms. Those are good things to put in the process documentation, as well as, as a number of things, right? Templates that you might want to have out there to build ongoing integrations with, checklists for end users to do month end, or documented workarounds for when something doesn't behave the right way. Okay, links to articles or blog posts that are meaningful for your environment. How to handle support, right? If you're out and somebody needs help to call for support, what to do, a checklist in there, contact information, subject matter experts, anything you can put in your OneNote to document how to get help will probably go a long way in your documentation. It serves as a great guide for new hires. As a resource, you say, hey, we really got our act together because, we can support our GP environment well. A good, well-documented environment goes a long way in that effect. And then finally, having this documentation now helps you affect updates and service pack rollouts at some point in the future. You don't have to do a full-blown system on it because you've already got everything pretty much caught up in your system administrator log. That being said, thank you all for coming and watching today. I'm really looking forward to answering some more of your questions here in the live Q&A chat here. I hope we saw a few questions, but I'm hoping that we can get a few more within the live folks. And also DynamicsCon, thank you again so much. This is a cool event to take a part of, but also to watch. You have a great YouTube channel. I myself have a number of past YouTubes out there on some of the topics we talked about related today. I also am very much looking forward to seeing you in Scottsdale for DynamicsCon Live. A new track this year that we're really excited about is the cross-product track. And my specialty in the last few years has been Microsoft Power BI. So come sign up, get to this conference, and I've got a couple sessions on Power BI for Great Plains as well as Power BI for Business Central. Again, my name is David Laster. Again, thank you so much for coming to my session, and let's go to the Q&A.